The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah Martinez laced up her running shoes at exactly 6:30 a.m., just as she had every morning for the past 3 years. At 34, Sarah had developed routines that kept her grounded, a necessity. When your job as a veterinary technician meant facing life-and-death situations daily, her usual route through Steele Indian School Park offered a peaceful reprieve from the chaos of Phoenix's emergency animal clinic, where she spent her days saving creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. The morning air carried the familiar scent of creosote and desert sage as Sarah began her steady pace along the winding path. She loved these early hours when the park belonged to joggers, dog walkers, and the occasional homeless person seeking shelter under the ramadas. The desert landscape, dotted with palo verde trees and barrel cacti, provided a stark beauty that never failed to center her thoughts before another unpredictable day at the clinic. But this morning would shatter her peaceful routine forever. About a mile into her run, Sarah noticed something unusual near a cluster of desert shrubs about 50 yards off the main path. At first glance, it looked like scattered trash-white objects catching the morning light. Phoenix had its share of litter problems, and Sarah had often picked up debris during her runs. However, as she slowed her pace and squinted through the desert glare, the white objects seemed to be moving. No, not moving. Something was moving among them. Sarah's veterinary instincts kicked in as she left the path and approached the disturbance. What she discovered made her stomach lurch, and her professional training screamed danger. A German Shepherd mix, so emaciated that every rib was visible through matted, dirt-crusted fur, was frantically pawing through dozens of scattered prescription bottles. But this wasn't a dog simply investigating trash. He was methodically consuming pills inside with desperate, almost frantic movements. The scene was surreal and horrifying. Orange prescription bottles, their white caps scattered like confetti across the desert floor, lay empty around the skeletal animal. The dog's movements were weak but determined, his black muzzle stained with the residue of crushed pills. Sarah could read some of the labels from where she stood: alprazolam, oxycodone, sertraline, clonazepam, a cocktail of anti-anxiety medications, painkillers, and antidepressants that could kill a human, let alone a starving dog. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the desert silence. The German Shepherd looked up at her approach, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. The dog's eyes held an intelligence that was both haunting and heartbreaking, not the vacant stare of a sick animal, but the desperate, purposeful gaze of a creature on a mission. His ears, though drooping from weakness, perked slightly at her presence. Most telling of all was what he wore: a faded red service dog vest hanging loosely on his skeletal frame like a ghost of its former purpose. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't some random stray consuming garbage. Service dogs underwent years of specialized training, costing upwards of $20,000 and representing a lifeline for disabled handlers. The methodical way this dog was consuming specific medications suggested training, not desperation. But what kind of training would teach a dog to eat potentially lethal human medications? The dog's condition was severe. Sarah estimated he'd lost at least 30 pounds from his ideal weight. His coat, once probably a lustrous black and tan, was now dull and patchy. Open sores on his legs suggested he'd been living rough for days, possibly weeks. But most alarming was his breathing, shallow and rapid, indicating either severe dehydration or the beginning stages of medication toxicity. As Sarah crept closer, she noticed the dog's technique was disturbingly systematic. He would nose through the bottles, select specific ones, and consume their contents with practiced efficiency. It wasn't the random gorging of a starving animal, it was learned behavior. Someone had trained this service dog to do exactly what he was doing. But why? And where was his handler? The morning air suddenly felt colder as Sarah realized the implications. Service dogs were matched with handlers who had specific disabilities, PTSD, seizure disorders, mobility issues, or psychiatric conditions. If this dog was trained to deliver medications to his handler, and he was now consuming them alone in the desert, what had happened to the person who depended on him? Sarah's veterinary training told her the dog had minutes, not hours before. The medication cocktail in his system became lethal. The combination of benzodiazepines and opioids could cause respiratory depression, cardiac arrest, or complete organ shutdown. Every second she hesitated could be his last. But approaching a distressed service dog presented its own dangers. These animals were trained to protect their handlers and could become aggressive when confused or separated from their person. Sarah had seen service dogs attack veterinary staff when their handlers were unconscious or unable to give commands. This dog was clearly in distress, possibly hallucinating from the medications, and might perceive her as a threat. Still, watching him slowly poison himself wasn't an option. Sarah reached into her running pack and pulled out the protein bar she always carried for post-workout fuel. In her years of veterinary work, she'd learned that food was often the universal language between humans and animals in crisis. She unwrapped the bar slowly, the crinkling sound immediately catching the dog's attention. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, crouching low to appear less threatening. "I know you're hungry, but those pills aren't food. How about we try something? That won't kill you instead?" The dog's head tilted slightly, a gesture so heartbreakingly normal that Sarah had to fight back tears. Whatever this animal's story was, it was about to become hers to solve. She just hoped she wasn't already too late to save him, or to find the person who desperately needed him to come home. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the protein bar, knowing that every second of hesitation could be the difference between life and death for the German Shepherd before her. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the desert. Floor littered with empty pill bottles, a pharmaceutical graveyard that told a story she was only beginning to understand. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the desert breeze. "I'm here to help." The dog's response chilled her to the bone. Instead of showing interest in the food, he returned to his methodical consumption of pills, his movements becoming increasingly sluggish. Sarah could see the telltale signs of medication toxicity beginning to manifest. His pupils were dilated despite the bright sunlight. His breathing had become labored, and a fine tremor was developing in his hind legs. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the cocktail of drugs in his system reached lethal levels. Drawing on her years of experience with traumatized animals, Sarah began moving in slow, deliberate motions. She broke off a piece of the protein bar and tossed it gently toward the dog, not close enough to threaten him, but near enough to capture his attention. The morsel landed with a soft thud near his front paws. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the dog stared at the food. Then, something extraordinary happened. His nose twitched, and for the first time since Sarah had discovered him, his tail gave the faintest wag. It was such a subtle movement that someone without her veterinary background might have missed it entirely, but to Sarah, it was a beacon of hope. Somewhere beneath the medication haze and physical deterioration, the dog's natural instincts were still fighting. "That's it," she encouraged, breaking off another piece and placing it slightly closer to herself. "Real food, buddy, the kind that won't stop your heart." As the dog slowly moved toward the protein bar, Sarah got her first clear look at his service vest. The fabric was faded and torn, but she could make out partial text. "Service dog do." Not ... double quotes. The rest was illegible, obscured by dirt and damage. More concerning were the vest's pockets designed to carry medication. They hung empty and torn, as if someone had ripped them open in desperate haste. The dog reached the protein bar and began eating with careful, measured bites. Sarah noticed his technique even here. He wasn't wolfing down the food like a starving stray would. Instead, he ate with the controlled manner of an animal trained. In proper behavior, even while dying from medication poisoning. This level of discipline didn't happen by accident. It required years of specialized training and a bond with a handler that went far beyond typical pet ownership. Sarah used the dog's momentary distraction to study the scattered prescription bottles more carefully. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The labels all bore the same name, Marcus Thompson, with an address in nearby Tempe. The prescriptions were recent, most dated within the last 2 weeks, and the quantities were staggering. Xanax, 90 pills. Oxycontin, 60 pills. Zoloft, 30 pills. Trazodone, 45 pills. This wasn't a typical prescription load. This was the medication arsenal of someone fighting a serious battle with mental health. But here's what terrified Sarah most. The bottles weren't randomly empty. Someone had organized them by type, and the dog was consuming them in a specific sequence. Anxiolytics first, then pain medications, followed by antidepressants. It was as if he'd been programmed to deliver a precise pharmaceutical cocktail. But with no handler present to receive it, he was consuming it himself. "What did they train you to do?" Sarah murmured, her heart breaking as the pieces began falling into place. The dog finished the protein bar and looked up at her with eyes that seemed to plead for understanding. His breathing was becoming more labored, and Sarah noticed a slight blue tinge developing around his gums, a sign of oxygen deprivation that meant they were running out of time rapidly. Making a decision that went against every safety protocol she'd learned, Sarah moved closer to the dog. Service animals could be unpredictable when separated from their handlers, and this one was under the influence of enough medication to drop. A grown man, but watching him die wasn't an option. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly, reaching out her hand for him to sniff. "But we need to go now, or you're not going to make it." The dog's response shocked her. Instead of backing away or showing aggression, he pressed his muzzle into her palm and let out a soft whine that sounded almost like relief. It was as if he understood that she represented salvation, even in his medically compromised state. Sarah quickly assessed the situation. The dog probably weighed around 70 pounds in his current emaciated state, normally manageable. But she was a 5'6" veterinary technician, not a powerlifter. Her Honda Civic was parked a quarter mile away, and carrying a sedated German Shepherd across desert terrain would be nearly impossible alone. Then she remembered her phone. Sarah pulled out her cell and dialed 911, knowing that emergency services could reach the park faster than she could transport the dog herself. 911. What's your emergency? This is Sarah Martinez. I'm a veterinary technician at Desert Hills Animal Emergency. I'm at Steele Indian School Park with a service dog that's consumed a massive quantity of human medication. The animal is going into toxic shock and needs immediate transport to a veterinary facility. Ma'am, did you say a dog has consumed human medication? Yes, and I need animal control and possibly paramedics. This dog appears to be trained to deliver medication to a disabled handler, but the handler is missing. The dog has been consuming the medication himself and is dying from an overdose. As she spoke, the dog suddenly stiffened and fell onto his side, his legs beginning to paddle in the air. Sarah recognized the signs immediately. He was having a seizure, likely caused by the toxic combination of drugs in his system. "I need that transport now," Sarah shouted into the phone. "The animal is seizing, and I don't have the equipment here to save him. We have maybe 5 minutes before we lose him completely." She ended the call and knelt beside the seizing dog, using her body to prevent him from injuring himself on the scattered pill bottles and desert debris. His service vest had ridden up during the seizure, revealing something that made Sarah's heart stop. A metal plate riveted to a leather collar underneath, engraved with words that changed everything she thought she knew about this situation. The plate read, Atlas Psychiatric Service DOG, if found alone. Handler in crisis call, 911 immediately. The screaming of sirens pierced the desert morning as Sarah cradled Atlas's convulsing body, her veterinary training taking over despite the surreal circumstances. The German Shepherd's seizure had lasted nearly 3 minutes, an eternity in medical terms, before gradually subsiding into violent tremors that racked his emaciated frame. His breathing was shallow and erratic, his tongue lolling out in a disturbing shade of blue that signaled severe oxygen deprivation. "Hang on, Atlas," Sarah whispered, using his name for the first time. The metal identification plate had revealed not just his identity, but the terrifying reality that somewhere in Phoenix, a veteran with psychiatric disabilities was in crisis without his lifeline. The first responders arrived in a choreographed chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices. Paramedic David Santos, whom Sarah knew from previous emergency calls involving injured animals, took one look at the scene and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Jesus, Sarah, what have we got here?" David asked, kneeling beside the unconscious dog while his partner began loading emergency veterinary supplies from their enhanced animal rescue kit, a recent addition to Phoenix Emergency Services. Service dog psychiatric support appears to have consumed his handler's entire medication supply, Sarah rattled off, her professional demeanor masking the emotional turmoil churning beneath. "I've identified at least 4 different drug classes: benzodiazepines, opioids, SSRIs, and sedatives. He's been seizing, showing signs of respiratory depression, and his handler is missing." David's experienced hands worked quickly, establishing and 4-line with Ringer's lactate solution, while Sarah supported Atlas's airway. The dog's pulse was thready and irregular, classic signs of polydrug toxicity that could stop his heart at any moment. "Transport time to Desert Hills is 12 minutes in traffic," David announced, carefully lifting the 70-pound dog onto a modified stretcher designed for large animals. "Can he make it that long?" Sarah's jaw tightened as she climbed into the ambulance beside Atlas, her hand resting on his chest to monitor his breathing. "He has to. Someone trained this dog for years, spent thousands of dollars on his education, and is counting on him to survive whatever crisis they're both facing." The race through Phoenix streets became a blur of radio chatter, medical interventions, and Sarah's constant monitoring of Atlas's vital signs. Twice during the 12-minute journey, the dog's breathing stopped completely, requiring Sarah to perform manual resuscitation while David administered emergency medications normally reserved for human overdose cases. Desert Hills Animal Emergency erupted into controlled chaos as they arrived. Dr. James Chun, the senior veterinarian and Sarah's mentor, was already scrubbed and waiting in Trauma Bay 2, having received Sarah's radio transmission during transport. "Talk to me," Dr. Chun commanded as they transferred Atlas to the treatment table, his hands immediately beginning a systematic physical examination that would determine the dog's chances of survival. Male German Shepherd, approximately 3 years old. Service dog designation for psychiatric support, Sarah reported with clinical precision while connecting Atlas to the hospital's advanced monitoring equipment. Found consuming handler's prescription medications in systematic pattern. Estimated consumption includes 90 milligrams alprazolam, unknown quantity oxycodone, sertraline, and trazodone. Patient experienced tonic-clonic seizure lasting 3 minutes, followed by periods of apnea requiring manual resuscitation. Dr. Chun's face grew grave as the monitors began displaying Atlas's vital statistics, all of them hovering in dangerous territory. Heart rate 42, blood pressure 70/40, oxygen saturation 81%. This dog should be dead. As they worked to stabilize Atlas with activated charcoal, 4 fluids, and respiratory support, Sarah noticed something that made her pause mid-procedure. Despite his unconscious state, Atlas's front paws kept moving in a specific pattern, paddling motion that wasn't random muscle contractions from the medications. "Dr. Chun, look at his front paws," Sarah said, pointing to the repetitive movement. "That's not seizure activity or drug-induced muscle fasciculation. It's purposeful." Dr. Chun stopped his examination to observe the dog's movements more carefully. The paddling motion was indeed deliberate. Atlas was performing what appeared to be a trained behavior, even while unconscious and fighting for his life. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Chun admitted, his 20 years of veterinary experience clearly shaken. "It's as if he's trying to complete a task while comatose." Sarah's mind raced through her knowledge of service dog training protocols. Psychiatric service dogs are trained for specific behaviors: deep pressure therapy, medication retrieval, interrupting nightmares, creating physical barriers during panic attacks. But I've never heard of one trained to consume medications. As they began the gastric lavage procedure to remove any remaining pills from Atlas's stomach, what they discovered defied every assumption about the case. The dog's stomach contents revealed a precisely measured mixture of medications, not the random gorging of a desperate animal, but calculated doses that would have been therapeutic for a human experiencing a severe psychiatric episode. "Sarah, look at this," Dr. Chun called, examining the evidence under the laboratory microscope. "These pills weren't just swallowed whole. They've been partially dissolved, as if he was trained to pre-process them for easier absorption. And the quantities." He paused, running calculations on his tablet. If these doses were administered to a 180-pound adult male experiencing acute PTSD symptoms, they would be exactly what a psychiatrist might prescribe for emergency intervention. The implications sent chills down Sarah's spine. "You're saying Atlas wasn't randomly eating pills. He was self-medicating according to his training, but without his handler there to receive the treatment." Dr. Chun nodded grimly as they continued working to save the dog's life. "Which means somewhere in Phoenix, there's a veteran with severe PTSD who's been without his psychiatric medications and is trained support animal for at least 72 hours. The question is, did he abandon Atlas, or is he lying somewhere, unable to call for help?" The microchip scanner's beep interrupted their speculation. Dr. Chun ran the device over Atlas's shoulder, and the information that appeared on screen made both veterinarians freeze. "Marcus Thompson, 1247 East Apache Boulevard, Tempe, Arizona," Dr. Chun read aloud. "Emergency contact: Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Phoenix VA Medical Center, Psychiatric Services. Registration date: March 15, 2022. Training certification: Advanced. Psychiatric service dog, specialized in medication management and crisis intervention." Sarah grabbed her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the VA hospital. If Marcus Thompson is registered there, they'll have records of his condition and emergency protocols." But as she dialed, a Phoenix Police Department cruiser pulled into the clinic's emergency bay, its lights flashing ominously. Through the window, Sarah could see Officer Maria Rodriguez approaching with the unmistakable posture of someone bearing terrible news. "Dr. Chun," Sarah said quietly, her phone call forgotten. "I think we're about to learn what happened to Atlas's handler." Officer Maria Rodriguez stepped through the clinic's automatic doors with the measured gait of someone who had delivered too much bad news in her 15-year career with Phoenix PD. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the expression on the officer's weathered face, a mixture of professional composure and barely contained frustration that police wore when dealing with cases that defied easy explanation. "Dr. Martinez?" Officer Rodriguez asked, consulting her notepad. "I understand you're the one who found the service dog this morning?" Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively moving to Atlas's unconscious form on the treatment table. Even sedated and fighting for his life, the German shepherd's presence had become oddly comforting. Yes, I found him in Steele Indian School Park, consuming prescription medications. The bottles were all prescribed to Marcus Thompson. Officer. Rodriguez's expression darkened. That's why I'm here. Marcus Thompson was reported missing 3 days ago by his neighbor, Elena Vasquez. She's been checking on him since he got out of the VA hospital last month after what she described as a really bad episode. Dr. Chon looked up from adjusting Atlas's foredrip, his brow furrowed with concern. What kind of episode? According to the neighbor, Thompson had been struggling with severe PTSD symptoms for weeks. Officer Rodriguez explained, flipping through her notes. Multiple calls to crisis intervention services, missed appointments at the VA, and what Mrs. Vasquez described as screaming nightmares that could be heard through the apartment walls. She said the only thing that seemed to calm him down was his service dog. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What did you find at his apartment? Officer Rodriguez's jaw tightened. That's where things get complicated. The apartment shows clear signs of a struggle, but not the kind you'd expect from a break-in or assault. Furniture was overturned, but from the inside like someone was fighting their own demons rather than an intruder. We found prescription bottles smashed against the walls, mirrors broken, and what appeared to be a barricade built from furniture blocking the front door. The pieces of the puzzle were forming a horrifying picture in Sarah's mind. He was having a psychotic episode. That's what the VA psychiatrist thinks, Officer Rodriguez confirmed. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves has been treating Thompson for combat-related PTSD since he returned from his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan. According to her, Thompson had been struggling with paranoid delusions, convinced that insurgents were tracking him in Phoenix. The episodes had been getting worse, and she'd been trying to adjust his medication regimen. Dr. Chun paused in his examination of Atlas. And the service dog was trained to help manage these episodes? More than that, Officer Rodriguez said, consulting another page in her notepad. According to Dr. Reeves, Atlas wasn't just an emotional support animal. He was specifically trained in what they call medical alert and response. The dog could detect the onset of Thompson's PTSD episodes through scent changes and body language, then retrieve specific medications and bring them to Thompson in the exact doses needed to prevent a full psychological break. Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. So when Thompson disappeared during an episode ... Atlas followed his training, Officer Rodriguez finished. The dog tracked Thompson's scent to the park, found the medications Thompson had apparently scattered there during his crisis, and began consuming them himself when he couldn't locate his handler to deliver them to. The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of Atlas's heart monitor and the soft hiss of his oxygen support. Sarah stared at the unconscious dog with new understanding and heartbreak. Atlas hadn't been randomly consuming pills. He'd been desperately trying to complete his mission, even at the cost of his own life. There's more, Officer Rodriguez continued, her voice dropping to a more somber tone. We found a suicide note in Thompson's apartment, but it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't about ending his life, it was about protecting Atlas. She pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing a crumpled piece of notebook paper. Through the clear plastic, Sarah could make out handwriting that grew increasingly erratic as it progressed down the page. The note says, I can't control what I'm becoming. The episodes are getting worse, and I'm afraid I'll hurt Atlas during a flashback. He's a good dog, the best dog, and he doesn't deserve to suffer because I'm broken. If something happens to me, please make sure someone takes care of him. He tries so hard to help me, but I think I'm beyond helping now. Dr. Chun removed his surgical gloves with deliberate slowness, his expression troubled. So Thompson didn't abandon Atlas. He was trying to protect him. That's what we think, Officer Rodriguez confirmed. Mrs. Vasquez reported hearing Thompson shouting at Atlas to get away and leave me alone on the night he disappeared. She thought it was strange because Thompson usually talked to the dog gently, even during his worst episodes. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes as she imagined the scene, a veteran in the grip of a psychological crisis, forcing away the one creature trained to help him because he was afraid his condition might harm his loyal companion. Where do you think Thompson went? Officer Rodriguez's expression grew even more grim. That's the problem. We've been searching for 3 days with no success. Thompson's cell phone was found smashed in his apartment. His credit cards haven't been used, and he withdrew his entire bank account, $237, from an ATM on Indian School Road the night he disappeared. After that, he vanished completely. Have you checked homeless encampments, hospitals, the morgue? Dr. Chun asked quietly. All of them, multiple times. We've had search teams combing the desert areas around Phoenix, checked every VA facility in the state, and issued BOLO alerts to law enforcement agencies in a 300-mile radius. It's like Marcus Thompson just evaporated. Sarah looked down at Atlas, whose breathing had stabilized slightly, but remained critically weak. What about Atlas's tracking abilities? Could he help find Thompson? Officer Rodriguez shook her head sadly. Even if he recovers, Thompson's been missing for 3 days in Arizona desert conditions. If he's still alive. She left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. Dr. Rodriguez, Sarah said suddenly, a thought striking her. You said Thompson withdrew money from an ATM on Indian School Road. Which direction is that from his apartment? Officer Rodriguez consulted. Her notes. East toward the Salt River area. Why? Sarah's pulse quickened. Because Atlas was found about 2 miles east of there, in Steele Indian School Park. What if Thompson didn't just randomly scatter his medications? What if he was following a specific route, and Atlas has been retracing it? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Sarah was right, Atlas might not have been randomly consuming medications in the park. He might have been following a trail that could lead them directly to Marcus Thompson. But first, they had to save the dog's life. 24 hours after Atlas's near-death experience, Sarah found herself sitting beside his recovery kennel at 3 a.m., unable to sleep and unwilling to leave the German Shepherd's side. The dog had survived the massive drug overdose through what Dr. Chun called pure stubbornness and superior genetics. But his recovery was revealing behaviors that chilled Sarah to her core. Atlas refused to eat normally. Instead, he would take a few bites of his prescribed recovery diet, then carefully carry individual kibbles to the kennel door and drop them there, whimpering softly. When Sarah first witnessed this behavior, she assumed it was confusion from the medication toxicity. But as the pattern repeated throughout the day, a horrifying realization dawned. Atlas was trying to save food for Marcus. He's still working, Sarah whispered to Dr. Chun during the early morning rounds. Even after nearly dying, he's still trying to complete his mission. Dr. Chun paused in updating Atlas's medical chart, his expression troubled. I've been researching advanced psychiatric service dog training protocols since yesterday. What Atlas was trained to do goes far beyond standard emotional support. He was essentially programmed to be a living, breathing medical intervention system. Sarah watched as Atlas performed another heartbreaking ritual he would nose through. His water bowl, then press his muzzle against the kennel door as if trying to carry water to someone who wasn't there. How sophisticated was his training? According to the documentation I received from the VA, Atlas underwent 18 months of specialized training at a cost of $38,000, Dr. Chun explained, consulting his tablet. He was trained to detect Marcus's stress hormones through scent, recognize the early stages of PTSD episodes through behavioral cues, and respond with a graduated intervention protocol. Graduated intervention? Dr. Chun pulled up a detailed training document on his screen. Level 1. Deep pressure therapy. Atlas would lie across Marcus's legs or chest to provide calming weight. Level 2. Environmental control, creating physical barriers between Marcus and perceived threats during paranoid episodes. Level 3. Medication management, retrieving specific drugs in predetermined sequences based on Marcus's symptoms. Sarah felt her stomach drop. And Level 4? Emergency response. If Marcus became completely non-responsive or showed signs of self-harm, Atlas was trained to consume the medications himself to prevent Marcus from taking a potentially lethal overdose during a psychotic break. The kennel fell silent except for the soft whimpering of Atlas, who had now begun scratching at the door with increasing desperation. Sarah stared at the dog with new understanding and horror. You're saying Atlas was trained to overdose himself if necessary? It's an extreme protocol, usually reserved for veterans with documented suicide attempts, Dr. Chun said quietly. The theory is that the dog's life-threatening condition would force emergency intervention, bringing medical help to both the veteran and the service animal. It's controversial, ethically questionable, and apparently exactly what Atlas did when he couldn't find Marcus. Sarah's hands shook as she opened Atlas's kennel door. The dog immediately pressed against her legs, his entire body trembling with anxiety. How could they train an animal to essentially commit suicide? Because veterans with severe PTSD have a suicide rate 22% higher than the general population, Dr. Chun replied grimly. For some handlers, having a service dog willing to sacrifice itself becomes the only thing preventing them from ending their own lives. It's a last resort, but for Marcus Thompson, it might have been the difference between life and death. As if responding to their conversation, Atlas suddenly became agitated, pulling toward the clinic's exit with surprising strength for a dog still recovering from massive drug toxicity. Sarah clipped the leash to his collar, and Atlas immediately began leading her in a specific direction east, toward the area where she'd found him. Dr. Chun, I think Atlas is trying to show us something, Sarah called over her shoulder as the dog pulled her through the clinic's automatic doors into the cool pre-dawn air. Outside, Atlas's behavior became even more dramatic. He began following an invisible trail, his nose to the ground, occasionally stopping to whimper at specific locations. Sarah realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Atlas was retracing Marcus's movements from 3 nights ago, following a scent trail that should have been obliterated by desert winds and time. This isn't possible, Sarah murmured, but Atlas's certainty was undeniable. The dog led her 6 blocks east, then turned north toward a drainage canal that fed into the Salt River system. At each turn, Atlas would pause, look back at Sarah with pleading eyes, then continue forward with renewed determination. As they reached the canal, Atlas's behavior changed dramatically. He began pacing back and forth along the concrete edge, whimpering with increasing urgency. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Officer Rodriguez, knowing that what she was witnessing could be crucial to finding Marcus Thompson. Officer Rodriguez, it's Sarah Martinez. I'm with Atlas at the Central Canal Drainage System, about 2 miles from where I found him yesterday. He's showing extreme agitation, and I think he's following Marcus's trail from the night he disappeared. Sarah, it's 4 in the morning. Are you sure you should be out there alone with a dog that nearly died yesterday? Atlas is trying to tell us something, Sarah insisted, watching as the German Shepherd continued his frantic pacing. He's been trained for search and rescue as part of his psychiatric service protocols. I think he knows where Marcus went. Officer Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. I'll meet you there in 10 minutes. Don't move until I arrive, and whatever you do, Don't let that dog jump into the canal. The water flow has been heavy this week due to monsoon runoff upstream. As Sarah waited, Atlas's behavior became increasingly desperate. He would approach the canal edge, whine loudly, and return to her side as if seeking permission or assistance. A pattern repeated every few minutes, and Sarah began to understand that Atlas wasn't just following a scent trail, he was showing her exactly where Marcus had gone. When Officer Rodriguez arrived with backup units and search equipment, Atlas immediately led the team to a specific section of the canal where storm grates fed into underground drainage tunnels. The dog began barking the first vocal sound Sarah had heard him make and scratching at a particular grate with frantic determination. He's never barked before, Sarah told Officer Rodriguez, not once during his entire recovery. This means something. Officer Rodriguez knelt beside the storm. Great Atlas was indicating and shined her flashlight into the darkness below. What she saw made her immediately radio for emergency rescue equipment and additional personnel. Central Dispatch, this is Rodriguez. I need fire department rescue teams and medical support at the Central Canal Drainage System. Coordinates arm. Transmitting now. We may have located our missing veteran, and we're going to need specialized equipment to reach him. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized Atlas had accomplished the impossible. He had led them to Marcus Thompson 3 days after losing his trail, while fighting his own battle for survival. The question now was whether they were too late to save the man Atlas had nearly died trying to protect. The pre-dawn darkness around the Central Canal Drainage System erupted into controlled chaos as Phoenix Fire Department rescue teams descended into the underground tunnel system that Atlas had led them to. Sarah crouched beside the German Shepherd, who remained fixed at the storm grate, his entire body vibrating with an intensity she'd never witnessed in any animal, a combination of hope, desperation, and unwavering determination that defied his recent brush with death. Atlas, easy boy, Sarah whispered, but the dog's focus was absolute. His ears were pricked forward, head tilted as if listening for sounds that human ears couldn't detect. Every few seconds, he would release a soft whine that seemed to echo into the darkness below, as if calling to someone he knew was there. Captain Miguel Santos of the Phoenix Fire Department Technical Rescue Unit emerged from his equipment truck with a grim expression. The tunnel system extends for approximately 3 miles underground, feeding into the Salt River drainage network. If someone went down there during the recent monsoon activity, the water levels would have been life-threatening. Officer Rodriguez consulted her notepad by flashlight. Thompson disappeared 3 nights ago, during the storm that brought 2 inches of rain in 4 hours. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sarah felt her heart sink as she processed the implications. Marcus Thompson, in the grip of a severe PTSD episode, had apparently taken refuge in an underground drainage system during one of the heaviest rainfalls of the monsoon season. The chances of survival in those conditions were minimal. But Atlas seemed to disagree. As the rescue teams prepared their equipment, the German Shepherd began exhibiting behavior that Sarah had only read about in veterinary journals scent tracking, so precise it bordered on supernatural. Despite his recent medical trauma, Atlas was demonstrating the full extent of his 18 months of specialized training. Dr. Martinez, Captain Santos called. Can you explain what the dog is doing? It might help us understand where to focus our search efforts. Sarah watched Atlas carefully before responding. The dog was moving in a specific pattern along the sea. Canal edge 3 steps east, pause and sniff, 2 steps back, then repeat. He's triangulating, Sarah realized aloud. He's not just following a scent trail. He's calculating trajectory and distance based on air current dispersal patterns. Captain Santos raised an eyebrow. Come again? Atlas was trained in advanced search and rescue protocols as part of his psychiatric service certification. Sarah explained, consulting the training documents Dr. Chun had forwarded to her phone. He can determine not just where someone has been, but where they were going based on scent dispersion, wind patterns, and ground disturbance. It's like having a four-legged GPS tracker with a nose 1,000 times more sensitive than human technology. As if responding to her explanation, Atlas suddenly changed his behavior dramatically. He moved to a point approximately 20 feet downstream from where the rescue teams were preparing to enter, began digging frantically at the concrete edge, and released a series of sharp barks that echoed through the pre-dawn silence. "He's found something," Officer Rodriguez said, rushing to the location Atlas had indicated. Captain Santos and his team quickly redirected their efforts to the new location, where Atlas continued his urgent signaling. As they prepared to enter the tunnel system at the point Atlas had specified, firefighter Jennifer Walsh made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain, look at this," Walsh called, shining her high-powered flashlight into the tunnel opening. "There are fresh scratches on the concrete walls, consistent with someone climbing down. And there," she aimed her light deeper into the tunnel, clothing fibers caught on the metal grating. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized the implications. Atlas led us to the exact point where Marcus entered the system. Even after 3 days in his weakened condition, he remembered precisely where his handler went. But Atlas wasn't finished demonstrating his capabilities. As the rescue teams entered the tunnel, the German Shepherd began a behavior that left everyone stunned. He started mapping the underground system from above ground, moving in precise patterns that corresponded to the tunnel layout. Atlas would stop at specific points, whine, then move to the next location. "It's like he's tracking Marcus's movement through the entire underground network," Sarah breathed, following Atlas as he led her along the surface in a pattern that perfectly matched the reports coming from the rescue teams below. "Martinez, your dog is incredible," Captain Santos's voice crackled through the radio. "Every location he's indicated from up there corresponds exactly to evidence we're finding down here: footprints, fabric tiers, even what appears to be a makeshift shelter, constructed from debris." As the search progressed, Atlas's behavior became increasingly agitated. His movements grew more frantic, and he began exhibiting signs of severe separation anxiety that Sarah recognized from her veterinary training panting, drooling, and a tremor that had nothing to do with his recent medical trauma. "He knows Marcus is close," Sarah reported to Officer Rodriguez. "Atlas is showing classic signs of a service dog detecting his handler in distress. His training is telling him that Marcus needs immediate medical intervention." Suddenly, Atlas broke away from Sarah and ran directly to a section of the canal, where a larger drainage outlet connected to the main tunnel system. His barking became continuous and urgent, and he began pawing at the concrete with such desperation that his pads began to bleed. "All units, concentrate on tunnel section 7. Officer Rodriguez radioed immediately. "The dog has indicated another priority location." Captain Santos's response came back within minutes, and the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "Rodriguez, we found personal items wallet, keys, and what appears to be a service dog training manual. The subject was definitely here, but there's no sign of him in this section." Sarah knelt beside Atlas, whose distress was becoming heartbreaking to witness. "Where is he, boy? Where did Marcus go?" Atlas looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold infinite sadness and frustration. Then, slowly, he turned and began walking away from the canal system entirely, heading toward a section of desert scrubland that stretched between the drainage area and the Salt River proper. "Officer Rodriguez," Sarah called urgently. "Atlas is indicating that Marcus left the tunnel system. He's tracking a trail leading toward the river bottom." The implications were sobering. If Marcus Thompson had left the relative safety of the underground tunnels and headed into the open desert, during a psychological crisis. His chances of survival dropped significantly. The Arizona desert was unforgiving under the best circumstances, and for someone experiencing severe PTSD symptoms without medication, it could be fatal. But Atlas pressed forward with unwavering determination, his nose to the ground, following an invisible trail that only he could detect. As the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the desert landscape, Sarah realized they were about to discover whether Marcus Thompson's 4-day ordeal in the Arizona wilderness had ended in tragedy or miracle. Atlas's behavior suggested he believed his handler was still alive. The question was whether they would reach him in time. The Arizona sun climbed mercilessly above the horizon as Atlas led the search team deeper into the Salt River bottom, a labyrinth of dried creek beds, concrete embankments, and makeshift homeless encampments that stretched for miles beneath Phoenix's urban sprawl. Sarah's legs burned from the rough terrain, but she refused to slow down. Atlas's behavior had shifted from determined tracking to something approaching panic, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as they approached their destination. "He's picking up fresh scent," Sarah reported breathlessly to Officer Rodriguez, who was coordinating with search teams positioned at strategic points throughout the river bottom. "Atlas is showing signs of acute stress that he only exhibits when Marcus is in immediate medical crisis." Atlas suddenly stopped at the edge of a concrete drainage channel and began the most heartbreaking display Sarah had ever witnessed. The German Shepherd began howling, not barking, but actual howling, a sound so mournful and desperate that it echoed off the concrete walls like the cry of a lost soul. His entire body shook with the effort, and actual tears formed in his dark eyes. "Jesus," Officer Rodriguez whispered, her professional composure cracking. "I've never seen anything like that." Sarah knelt beside Atlas, her veterinary training recognizing the signs of extreme emotional distress in an animal pushed beyond its psychological limits. "He knows Marcus is dying. This is the behavior dogs exhibit when they're watching their pack member in terminal distress. We have minutes, not hours." Captain Santos's voice crackled through the radio with urgent intensity. "All units, we've located what appears to be a makeshift shelter constructed beneath the Interstate 10 overpass, approximately 200 meters north of your position. The structure shows signs of recent habitation, but no visual contact with the subject." Atlas immediately bolted toward the location Captain Santos had described, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for a dog who had nearly died from drug overdose just days earlier. Sarah struggled to keep pace as Atlas navigated the treacherous terrain with the precision of an animal following invisible GPS coordinates. The shelter they discovered defied description, a complex structure built from shopping carts, tarps, cardboard, and salvaged construction materials. They created a surprisingly sophisticated hiding place beneath the overpass. It was clearly the work of someone with military engineering experience, designed to be invisible from casual observation while providing protection from the elements. "Marcus," Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the concrete space. "Marcus Thompson, we're here to help. Atlas is with us." The response was immediate and chilling. A voice from within the shelter, barely recognizable as human, began shouting in what sounded like military commands mixed with incoherent rambling. "Stay back. They're using civilians now. I won't let you take the dog. Atlas, fall back, fall back." Atlas's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. He collapsed as if shot, his body convulsing with what Sarah initially thought was another seizure. But as she knelt beside him, she realized Atlas was exhibiting something far more complex. He was responding to Marcus's distressed state with his own psychological breakdown, their bond so deep that one couldn't survive the other's trauma. "Officer Rodriguez, we need paramedics immediately," Sarah called urgently. "Both Marcus and Atlas are in crisis, and they're feeding off each other's distress." This is a psychological emergency requiring specialized intervention. The voice from the shelter continued its desperate monologue, revealing the full extent of Marcus's psychological deterioration. They've been tracking us for days, Atlas. The pills were compromised. That's why I threw them away. They put trackers in the medication. We can't trust anyone in uniform. We have to keep moving. Sarah's heart broke as she understood the tragic irony. Marcus had scattered his medications, not in random paranoia, but because he believed they were being used to track him. Atlas's consumption of those same pills had been an attempt to eliminate what Marcus perceived as a threat to their safety. "Marcus, my name is Sarah Martinez," she called toward the shelter, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening. "I'm a veterinary technician. I found Atlas 3 days ago when he was very sick. He's been looking for you ever since. He's hurt, and he needs you." The shelter fell silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a figure emerged that barely resembled the healthy young veteran from the ID photo Officer Rodriguez had shown her. Marcus Thompson was skeletal, his clothes hanging in tatters, his face gaunt and covered with 4 days of desperate beard growth. But his eyes held the same desperate intelligence Sarah had seen in Atlas. "Atlas?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh God, what did I do to you?" The reunion that followed transcended anything Sarah had witnessed in her years of veterinary work. Atlas and Marcus collapsed together in a tangle of tears, whimpers, and broken apologies. Marcus sobbed as he ran his hands over Atlas's too thin frame, feeling the evidence of their shared ordeal. "I threw away the pills because I thought they were tracking us," Marcus choked out, his words barely coherent through his tears. "I didn't." "No, you would try to bring them back to me. I was trying to protect you, and I almost killed you instead." Sarah approached slowly, recognizing that both man and dog were in a state of extreme psychological fragility. "Marcus, Atlas saved your life by nearly sacrificing his own. He consumed your medications to keep them away from you because he knew you were in crisis. That's what he was trained to do." Marcus looked up at Sarah with eyes that held 4 days of hell, his PTSD symptoms clearly still in full force. "Who are you? How do I know you're not part of the operation?" "Because Atlas trusts me," Sarah said simply, extending her hand toward the suspicious veteran. "And Atlas has never been wrong about people, has he?" Marcus stared at Sarah's outstretched hand for a long moment, then looked at Atlas, who had lifted his head and was watching the interaction with intense focus. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Atlas moved closer to Sarah and leaned against her leg, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than any words. "If Atlas trusts you," Marcus said finally, accepting Sarah's hand and allowing her to help him to his feet, "then I guess I have to trust you too." As paramedics arrived to assess both Marcus and Atlas, Sarah realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a rescue, but the reconstruction of a bond that had been tested by the darkest circumstances imaginable and had emerged stronger than ever. The question now, whether that bond would be enough to help both of them heal from the trauma they had endured. 6 months after that desperate dawn rescue beneath the Interstate 10 overpass, Sarah Martinez stood in the packed auditorium of the Phoenix Veterans Affairs Medical Center, watching Marcus Thompson deliver a speech that would have been unimaginable during his darkest days. Beside him on the stage, Atlas sat in perfect formation, wearing a new service vest that bore additional certifications, not just psychiatric support, but search and rescue, crisis intervention, and emergency medical response. "The thing about rock bottom," Marcus was saying to the audience of veterans, medical professionals, and lawmakers, "is that it gives you a solid foundation to build something better. Atlas and I found our rock bottom in that drainage tunnel. But we also found something else. We found each other again, and we found people who refused to give up on us. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as she remembered the long road that had brought them to this moment. Marcus's recovery had been anything but smooth. The first month after his rescue had involved intensive psychiatric treatment, medication, adjustments, and a complete restructuring of his support system. But the most remarkable part of his healing had been watching his bond with Atlas evolve from desperate codependency into something healthier and more sustainable. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Marcus's psychiatrist at the VA, had initially been skeptical of Sarah's proposal to create a three-way support network. It's unprecedented, she had argued. Service dog partnerships are typically designed as exclusive bonds between handler and animal. Introducing a third party could compromise the dog's training and loyalty. But Sarah had persisted, recognizing something that the medical professionals had missed. Atlas's near-death experience had traumatized him just as severely as Marcus's PTSD episode had affected the veteran. The dog needed his own support system, his own backup plan, to prevent future crises from becoming life-threatening. What we discovered, Sarah continued in her mind, watching Marcus gesture toward Atlas during his speech, is that isolation was the real enemy, not just for Marcus, but for Atlas too. The innovative support arrangement they had developed over the past 6 months had become a model that VA hospitals across the country were now studying. Sarah served as Atlas's emergency veterinary contact and backup handler, providing medical expertise in crisis intervention when Marcus's symptoms became overwhelming. Marcus maintained his primary bond with Atlas while receiving the security of knowing his service dog would never again face a life-threatening situation alone. And Atlas had flourished under the expanded support system, his confidence and health returning stronger than ever. The breakthrough came, Marcus was explaining to the audience, when we realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a tactical necessity. In the military, we never operated alone. We had squads, backup support systems. Why should civilian life be any different? Sarah smiled as she remembered the moment that philosophy had crystallized into action. It had been during Marcus's third week of recovery, when he'd experienced a severe anxiety attack triggered by a car backfiring in the hospital parking lot. Instead of Atlas being forced to manage the crisis alone through his programmed responses, Sarah had been there to coordinate medical intervention while Atlas provided emotional support. The result had been Marcus's fastest recovery from an episode since his return from deployment. But the real validation of their approach had come 3 months ago, when Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. Dr. Martinez? The voice on the phone had been professional but urgent. This is Congressman David Williams's office. The congressman has been following the innovative support program you've developed with veteran Marcus Thompson and his service dog. We'd like to discuss the possibility of federal legislation based on your model. The result of that conversation was the proposed Atlas Act legislation that would require backup support systems for all veterans with service dogs, provide funding for emergency veterinary care, and establish protocols for crisis intervention that protected both handlers and their animals. The bill had bipartisan support and was expected to pass within the year. What we learned, Marcus continued in his speech, is that the strongest bonds aren't the ones that can't be broken. They're the ones that can be rebuilt stronger after breaking. Atlas and I broke together, and we healed together, but we couldn't have done either without Sarah. Sarah felt her cheeks flush as Marcus gestured toward her in the audience. She had never expected to become an advocate for veteran affairs, but her experience with Marcus and Atlas had revealed a gap in the support system that she was uniquely positioned to fill. She had since left her position at the emergency clinic to work full-time developing veterinary support programs for service dogs, funded by a combination of VA grants and private donations. The most rewarding part of her new career had been training other veterinary professionals in the specialized care that service dogs required. Many vets, she had discovered, had little understanding of the psychological complexity of these animals, or the devastating impact that separation from their handlers could have on their health and behavior. Atlas nearly died, not from the medications he consumed, but from the trauma of believing he had failed in his mission, Sarah had explained to a recent training seminar. These dogs need medical care that addresses both their physical and psychological needs, just like their veteran handlers. As Marcus concluded his speech, Atlas rose and walked to the edge of the stage, his tail wagging as he spotted Sarah. In the audience, the gesture was spontaneous and beautiful, the dog acknowledging the woman who had become his second chance at life. But the most profound moment came after the applause died down, when a young female veteran approached Marcus. During the reception, she was accompanied by a golden retriever wearing a service vest, and both woman and dog looked hauntingly familiar to Sarah, the same desperate exhaustion, the same fragile bond strained by circumstances beyond their control. "Mr. Thompson," the veteran said hesitantly, "my name is Jessica Chun, and this is Buddy. We've been struggling, and I heard about your program. I was wondering, do you think Dr. Martinez might be able to help us too?" Sarah watched as Marcus knelt down to Atlas's level, the dog immediately sensing his handler's emotional response to meeting another veteran in crisis. Atlas approached Buddy slowly, his body language calm and welcoming, a seasoned veteran offering support to a newcomer still fighting the war. "Sarah," Marcus called across the room, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to ask for help. "I think we just found our next mission." As Sarah approached the small group, veteran dog, and veterinarian, she realized that what had begun as a morning jog that saved one starving dog had evolved into something much larger, a movement that was changing how America cared for its wounded warriors and their four-legged lifelines. Sometimes the most shocking discoveries really do lead to the most beautiful transformations.